The desert had a way of turning on a man without warning. One moment, the sky stretched wide and unbroken, bathing the mesas in gold. The next, the horizon gathered itself into a furious, churning bruise. Tayan had seen bad weather before, but this storm rolled in like a living thing, fast, snarling. Impatient to swallow the landhole, he urged his horse, Ash Breath, into a gallop as the wind shifted direction, carrying sand that stung like needles against his cheeks. He had been tracking a missing horse since dawn, a young stallion that had bolted after a rattlesnake startled it. Tayan had promised the elders he would bring the horse back before nightfall, but the desert now had other plans. A crack of thunder split the sky. The ground trembled beneath him, and Ash Breath tossed his head, hooves skittering nervously on loose gravel. Tayan leaned low, whispering steadying words. Even his own voice was swallowed by the rising howl of wind. Rain came not in gentle drops, but in sudden merciless sheets. The sky emptied itself as if trying to cleanse the world in one violent sweep. The temperature dropped so fast Tayan felt it in his bones. The open mesa offered no shelter, no mercy. If he didn't find cover soon, the storm would strip him down to nothing. Lightning flashed again, bright enough to reveal, for a heartbeat, the jagged silhouette of cliffs rising to his right. He pulled Ash Breath toward them. Somewhere along that wall of rock, there had to be a crevice, an alcove, anything that could shield them. The horse slipped, caught himself, and pushed on. Tayan's braid whipped behind him like a frayed rope. His breath misted in the frigid air as he scanned the cliffside through stinging rain. Another flash. Another heartbeat of clarity. There, near the base of the rock, a dark shape. Not a shadow. An opening. A cave. Tayan didn't question his luck. He guided Ash Breath toward it, sliding off the saddle as they reached the mouth. The wind roared past them, trying to pull him back out into the chaos, but he pressed forward, tugging the horse behind him. The air inside the cave was still and cool, a welcome contrast to the storm clawing at the entrance. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but relief lasted only a moment. The cave wasn't empty. He smelled it first, a strange mixture of animal musk, damp stone, and something human, but wild, unwashed. The kind of scent that prickled the hair at the back of the neck. Tayan froze. Ash Breath's ears flattened, and the horse snorted softly. Muscles tight, Tayan lowered his hand, instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to his belt. The storm crashed outside. But within the cave, a different kind of tension built. Quiet, heavy, watchful. He took a careful step deeper, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The cave extended farther than he expected, its walls narrowing and then widening again. And in that darkened hollow, where the firelight from outside barely reached, he sensed movement. Something or someone was there, breathing softly, watching him. The storm might have chased him into the cave, but the storm was no longer his greatest concern. Something wild lived here, and it had just noticed. He was trespassing. Silence pressed against Tayan's ears, thicker than the storm outside. It was the kind of silence that belonged to places not meant for men, places claimed by creatures that moved without sound and watched without blinking. He kept still, letting his eyes adjust as Ash Breath shifted behind him. Hooves scraping softly against stone. Tayan raised a hand to calm the horse, but even he felt the animal's instinctive fear creeping into his own bones. Something lived in the cave, not merely passing through, but dwelling here, breathing the stale air day after day. The scent was unmistakable. A predator's den. But what kind? Wolves? A mountain cat? He crouched, running his fingers lightly over the cave floor. At first, he felt the grit of dust and the slickness of damp stone. Then, he found tracks small, not quite human, not quite wolf. Light impressions, the pads of feet hardened by stone, the claw-like pressure marks at the tips. He didn't understand them. Not at first. Behind him. Ashbreath suddenly jerked his head up, ears pricked sharply forward. The horse wasn't looking at the tracks. He was looking at the darkness beyond them. Tayan followed the horse's gaze. Something moved, a flicker. So quick he thought he imagined it, a shadow slipping between shadows. A soft scuff of skin or fur against stone. Tayan's fingers closed around the handle of his knife. Not to attack, but to reassure himself he had options. He took a slow step forward. The cave narrowed before opening into a wider chamber. The air grew colder as he approached the threshold, and with the cold came the unmistakable feeling of being seen. Not just seen, studied, measured. The way a wolf sizes up an intruder before deciding whether to attack or let him laugh. His grandmother had taught him, the world has two kinds of eyes, those that look, and those that judge. The unseen presence in this cave was doing the second. Tayan cleared his throat softly, not wanting to surprise whatever was lurking there. "I mean no harm," he said in Apache, then repeated it in broken Spanish, and finally whispered it in the universal language of tone. His voice echoed faintly against the stone, swallowed quickly by the darkness. No answer came, but the scent changed. A shift in the air, closer. Tayan's heart thudded, steady but alert. He let his hand fall away from the knife and opened his palms in a gesture of peace. "I only seek shelter," he said, voice barely above a breath. A low sound answered him, not a growl, not speech. Something between them. It came from the hollow ahead, a soft rumble, questioning, wary. Tayan peered deeper. The faint lightning outside cast a ghostly silver across the cave walls, and in that fleeting glow, he saw the outline of the hollow's occupant. Hair, long, tangled. A shape crouched low, arms close to the body. Eyes reflecting the light like an animal's, human. But not. The figure darted backward with startling speed, dissolving into darkness again. Tayan inhaled sharply. It wasn't a wolf or a mountain lion. It was something far stranger. A girl? A woman? The height suggested someone young, maybe teenaged. But the movements fast, fluid, instinctual, were not human. Fear rippled through him, not of the figure itself, but of the stories whispered around council fires, children lost to the desert, raised by beasts, forgetting the tongue and ways of their people. Was she one of them? He didn't step closer. He didn't move at all. He simply waited, breathing softly, letting her feel his presence without force. The storm screamed outside. But here in the dim stone belly of the earth, something unearthly and cautious watched him with the eyes of a creature that had survived too long without trust. Tayan swallowed. He had found shelter, but shelter had found him too. Lightning flared outside, a white-hot flash that threw shifting shadows across the cave walls. In that fleeting burst of light, Tayan saw her more clearly, not imagined this time. Not a shape blending with stone, but a living being. She crouched low, hands pressed to the ground, her bare feet gripping the stone like paws. Her hair hung in thick, tangled ropes down her back, matted by years of wind, dirt, and wild living. She was small, but not frail, her limbs wiry with the strength of someone who climbed more than she walked, who ran on instinct rather than learning, and her eyes, sharp, bright, yellow-brown, were nothing like the eyes of a girl raised among people. They were the eyes of a creature that trusted nothing except survival. Tayan instinctively froze. Any sudden movement might trigger her flight or her attack. He knew better than to treat her like prey or predator. She was neither. She was simply wild. She bared her teeth, not a snarl, but a warning display she must have learned from wolves. Her body language followed their patterns too. Weight forward, shoulders tense. crouched low to resist the urge to run yet prepared to spring if needed. "It's all right," Tayan murmured, his voice low and even. He had spoken to skittish horses and frightened children in the same tone. "I won't harm you." She tilted her head sharply, a flicker of confusion passing across her features. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. Tone meant everything in the world she lived in. She sniffed the air, the way an animal would, her nostrils flaring as she tried to place his scent: rain, horse, leather, smoke. Familiar in the animal world, yet alien in its mixture. Her gaze flicked to ash breath behind him. The horse remained motionless, trembling in place, but the girl seemed more curious than threatened. She made a soft clicking noise in her throat, something between a bird call and a wolf pup's chirp. Ash breath twitched an ear, bewildered. Then she did something Tayan didn't expect. She crept closer, not much, just a few inches. Her body still coiled like a spring, but she was drawing in more of his scent, studying him the way a wolf might study an intruder who had wandered into pack territory. Tayan slowly crouched to reduce his height. The move made her freeze, muscles locking as though she were carved from stone. They stayed like that for several breaths, two creatures caught in a delicate negotiation neither fully understood. At last, she chuffed softly, a sound of mild acceptance. She allowed him to exist in her space, but she made her terms immediately clear. She lifted her hand and pointed to the opposite side of the cave. Then she tapped her chest. Her meaning was unmistakable. "This is my den. You stay over there." Tayan raised both hands in surrender and nodded. "As you wish." He took slow, deliberate steps to the side she indicated. Only when she saw he obeyed did she relax slightly. Her shoulders lowered. Her breath steadied. Then, with fluid grace, she retreated into the deeper part of the cave. Not running, not hiding then, with fluid grace, she retreated into the deeper part of the cave. Not running, not hiding, simply reclaiming her territory. But even from the shadows, her eyes stayed on him. When Tayan unrolled his damp cloak and settled against the far wall, she mirrored him, curling up on her side, legs tucked close, one hand under her cheek the way wolves slept in their dens. The resemblance was painfully clear. She did not sleep like a human child. She slept like a cub. Lightning flashed again, and he saw that her skin bore faint scars, long-healed claw marks, bite marks, scratches from brambles and rock. She had survived things most people never would. Outside, the storm continued its furious assault on the land. But inside the cave, two worlds, one human. One wild lay tense and alert, divided by only a few yards of cold stone. Tayan closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to think. He had come seeking shelter instead. He had found a mystery living on 4 instincts and a heartbeat. The cave settled into a strange rhythm, one shaped by trust that wasn't trust, and peace that wasn't peace. Outside, the storm broke itself against the cliffs, the wind howling in long, furious waves. Inside, only two sounds remained: the gentle breathing of ash breath and the quiet, watchful stillness of the girl. Tayan didn't sleep, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. This cave was hers. He was the intruder. The least he could do was stay awake until he understood the rules of sharing her den. The girl stayed curled in her hollow, head resting lightly on her arm, yet her eyes were open the entire time, glinting like amber in the intermittent lightning flashes. A wolf never closed its eyes, unless it felt entirely safe. She did not feel safe. Neither did he. But he did feel calm. That alone surprised him. When the storm eased into a steady rumble, Tayan slowly rose onto one knee. The girl reacted instantly, shoulders lifting, chin lowering, body tensing like a coiled spring. He lifted his hands. "I'm not coming closer," he said softly. She didn't understand his words, but she understood the gesture, palms open. No threat. He mimicked a wolf's calming posture, head bowed slightly. Shoulders relaxed, eyes turning aside instead of staring directly at her. Dominant staring, he suspected, would trigger her defensive instincts. Her expression flickered with recognition. She had seen these gestures before, from wolves. She eased slightly, not fully relaxed, but no longer ready to launch herself at him. Taeyeon spoke again, this time letting his tone carry meaning rather than the words themselves. I want peace. Nothing more. She tilted her head. A curious gesture. One he had seen in pups trying to decipher unfamiliar sounds. So he tried something else. He pointed at himself. Taeyeon. Then, seeing her confusion deepen, he tried again, touching his chest. Taeyeon. Soft, clear. Her eyes narrowed, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully. She tapped her own chest with 2 fingers, slowly, as if considering whether she even had a name. After a long moment, she made a sound, soft, breathy, more exhale than word. Roa. It wasn't a human name, but it felt like one born from the throat of the wild. Taeyeon accepted it with a nod. Roa, he repeated gently. Her chin lifted a fraction. She liked hearing it from him, her first human interaction in perhaps many years. A crack of thunder echoed, shaking a spray of dust from the cave ceiling. Roa reacted in an instant, springing to her feet, knees bent, ready to defend herself. But the storm's roar faded, replaced by silence. Taeyeon took a risk. He mimicked her movement softly, clumsily, but enough to show he was paying attention. He crouched the same way she did, hands lightly touching the ground. He met her gaze for a split second, then looked aside in the wolf style of non-aggression. Roa blinked. Then. Incredibly, she responded in kind, softening her stance. Lowering her shoulders. He had spoken her language, not words. Body. Instinct. Understanding. She stepped forward 2 paces, sniffing the air, not at him, but at his cloak, wet with storm and horse scent. She crept closer, then paused abruptly when ash breath shifted. She hissed softly, a warning sound. Easy. Taeyeon murmured to the horse. At his calm voice, Roa's posture eased again. She glanced at him, really looked at him this time, and some flicker of recognition crossed her face, as though she saw more than a stranger, as though she sensed something familiar, or at least non-threatening. He extended a hand, not to touch her, not to invite her closer, but to show openness. Roa didn't accept the gesture. Not yet, but she didn't recoil either. She made a small clicking sound, the same one she had used earlier, and then, slowly, she turned and sat. Not in her hollow, not in a defensive crouch, but halfway between them, a compromise, a beginning. Dawn never truly reached the cave, only a muted grayness that filtered in through the rain-heavy clouds outside. The storm had quieted, but its memory still echoed in the cavern. The steady drip of water down the stone walls, the distant rumble, rolling off the mesas, the cold that clung stubbornly to the air. Taeyeon didn't move from where he sat. Roa remained halfway between him and her den, seated like a pup who had decided, for reasons known only to her, that this was the safest distance. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her spine straight, every muscle ready to coil and spring. She watched him. Not with suspicion now. With study. She sniffed the air, head twitching slightly as she sorted scents the way a wolf would read the world. Taeyeon respected her space, letting her process him on her own terms. She had a wild rhythm, a wild logic. Forcing anything would only shatter the fragile bond forming between them. Suddenly, Roa's posture shifted. Her spine straightened, nostrils flared, ears figuratively tilting forward. Something outside had caught her attention. Taeyeon had grown up in open land. He knew that look. It was the look of one who hears what others do not. What is it? He whispered. She didn't answer with sound. She answered with motion. Roa dropped to all fours and crawled to the cave mouth with astonishing speed, silent, fluid, her limbs moving with an animal's precision. Tayan rose cautiously and followed, stopping several paces behind her so he didn't trigger a defensive reaction. At the entrance, she crouched low, peering out into the brightening storm-washed world. Tayan listened. At first, he heard nothing except the wind. Then he heard it, a call. High, distant, echoing faintly between the rocks. A wolf's call. Soft, not a threat, more like a greeting. Roa answered instantly. She tipped her head back, parted her lips, and released a sound so uncanny, so perfect in pitch and shape, that Tayan felt the hair rise on his arms. It wasn't a human imitation of a wolf's howl. It was a wolf's howl, one born from the chest of someone who had lived among them long enough to master their language. The answering howl came again, closer. Roa chirred in her throat, a sound Tayan recognized from wolves greeting their packmates. She scrambled forward as if ready to run out into the open, but Tayan instinctively reached out. Wait! She froze at the touch, not because she didn't understand, but because she had never been touched by a human before. She pulled her arm back sharply and stared at him, not hostile, but startled. Her eyes darted from his hand to his face, trying to place the meaning behind contact. Tayan slowly lifted his hands, palms open. Danger, he murmured, pointing toward the outside. Storm, ground still wet, you could slip. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone and the gesture. She crouched again, peering out more carefully this time. The wolf pack wasn't approaching. Not yet. They were checking on her, calling out to confirm she was alive after the storm. Roa's breathing eased. She chuffed softly, reassuring them. And for the first time, Tayan saw another side of her. Not the wildness, not the ferocity, but belonging. She wasn't alone as he had first thought. She had a family, just not a human one. Wolves had raised her, taught her, fed her, protected her. And she, in turn, had become one of them. When she finally crawled back into the cave, she glanced at Tayan as though checking if he understood. He nodded. I hear them, he said softly. She blinked, her expression softer than before. For the first time, she looked less like a cornered animal, and more like a girl trying to understand the strange human who had entered her world. The storm finally loosened its grip on the land. Rain thinned to drizzles, then to mist, leaving the world outside washed, raw, and gleaming. From the cave entrance, Tayan breathed in the sharp scent of wet sagebrush and damp earth. A fragile calm settled over the mesa. But Roa was not calm. She paced, back and forth across the cave's threshold, her steps soundless on the stone, her movements too quick, too restless. Every few seconds she stopped dead still, ears attuned to sounds Tayan could not hear. Then she resumed her pacing, her breathing sharp and shallow. What is wrong? Tayan asked softly. She didn't answer with words, she didn't have them, but she answered with her body. She jumped to the entrance again, peered out, then darted back to him. She circled him once, sniffing the air around him the way a wolf might circle a wounded packmate. Then she froze, her head snapped toward the outside, body stiff as carved wood. A moment later, Tayan heard it too. Footsteps. But not human. Pause. Multiple. Fast. Approaching. Tay instinctively moved closer to his horse, placing a steadying hand on Ashbreath's neck. The gelding snorted, muscles quivering, eyes rolling with fear. Roa backed away from the entrance, her lips parting in a low warning sound. She crouched in front of Tayan not out of submission, but out of instinct. She was placing herself between him and whatever was coming. A heartbeat later, the first wolf appeared at the mouth of the cave. A large male, gray with a streak of black down his spine, his fur glistening with rain. His eyes gleamed like molten gold as he locked onto Tayan. He let out a deep, throaty growl, teeth bared. Tayan stiffened but didn't reach for his knife. He knew that movement would be the end. Another wolf appeared, and another. 4 in total. A patrol. Roa stepped forward and snarled sharp, high-pitched, insistent. A command. The wolves hesitated. They knew her. They recognized her scent, her posture, her place among them. But their eyes kept flicking to Tayan, hackles raised along their spines. A human in their den, storm or not, was unacceptable. The largest male advanced, each step careful and deliberate. Roa lunged in front of him, teeth bared. She didn't bite, she snapped at the air in front of his muzzle, a warning that any wolf would understand. The cave filled with sound, growls, huffs, the shuffling of paws on stone. Tayan stood completely still. He couldn't help Roa. Any interference would trigger an attack. The tension was tight enough to snap. Roa circled the alpha male, her movements urgent, ears flattened, tailbone low in a submissive yet pleading stance. She wasn't challenging him. She was negotiating. Tayan watched in awe. She was doing what wolves did within their own social structure, communicating with her entire body. This human is not a threat. This human is under my protection. Do not harm him. The alpha growled again, louder. Roa pressed her forehead to his neck, a gesture Tayan recognized instantly from watching wild packs, a sign of loyalty, of affection, of submission. The alpha's growl softened. Slowly he lowered his head and sniffed the air around Tayan. Ash breath trembled under Tayan's hand but did not bolt. Tayan kept his eyes down. His shoulders relaxed, mimicking Roa's earlier lessons without even thinking. He presented himself not as prey, not as predator, but as something neutral. The alpha huffed, a final warning breath. Then he backed away. The other wolves followed his lead. Roa chuffed a relieved, soft sound and nudged the alpha's shoulder once more. He flicked his ear in acknowledgement before leading the pack out into the fading storm. When the last wolf disappeared behind the brush, Roa turned to Tayan. She stepped closer than ever before. She touched his forearm, lightly, curiously, her first voluntary contact with him, a gesture that said, "You are under my protection." For the first time since he'd entered the cave, Tayan breathed fully. He had not only survived the wolves, he had been accepted because of her. When the last wolf howl faded into the dripping silence outside, Roa remained near Tayan, watching him with a new intensity, less like a wary creature and more like someone trying to understand a puzzle she had never encountered before. But the cave was growing colder, and the storm's tail end brought a sharp chill that crept through the stone. Tayan knelt near the center of the Thea cave and began gathering the driest sticks he could find from his small pack, scraps he'd kept from the early part of his journey. Roa followed his movements with eyes wide and unblinking, her curiosity overtaking her tension. "Fire," he whispered, as much to her as to himself. She tilted her head. Tayan struck flint against steel. Sparks flickered, a brief cascade of tiny stars, and Roa flinched back, startled, a soft growl slipping through her teeth. "It's all right," he said gently. "Watch." He struck again. This time she didn't recoil as far. Her eyes followed the sparks, fascinated yet cautious, like a wolf pup seeing lightning up close. Tayan cupped his hands around the dry grass and coaxed the ember to life. Orange light bloomed, warming the space around them. As the fire grew, shadows danced across the cave walls. Roa crept closer. Drawn by the warmth. She stretched out a hand, hesitant, trembling slightly, and stopped just short of the flames, feeling the heat. Her face shifted with wonder. She had seen fire before, but not like this, not controlled, not gentle. Her breath grew slow, rhythmic. And Tayan saw something he had not seen in her yet, stillness without fear. She sat beside him, not close enough to touch, but close enough for him to feel her presence, knees pulled up to her chest, chin resting on them. For a long time, they simply watched the flames together. The fire's glow softening the wild angles of her face. Then something changed. Her eyes. Narrowed, not in suspicion, in remembrance. The flames reflected in her pupils, and suddenly her breathing hitched. She leaned forward, gaze locked on the fire as if it were unlocking a long-sealed door inside her mind. "Roa?" Tayan murmured. But she didn't hear him. Her body grew tense, fingers digging into the stone beneath her. Her lips parted in a soundless exhale, and her eyes widened with something like fear or recognition. Then a soft, broken sound escaped her throat. A whisper. Not a word. A memory. She reached toward the flames again, this time not to touch the heat, but as though trying to grasp something intangible within it. Tayan watched, breath caught in his chest, as her expression changed, wildness fading, replaced by flickers of humanity. A flicker of before. The fire cracked loudly, and Roa recoiled with a small gasp. She covered her ears, curling into herself, rocking slightly. Tayan moved slowly, testing the fragile trust they'd built. He placed his hand gently on the ground between them, not touching her, but offering stability with his presence. "Roa," he whispered, steady and warm. "You're safe." Her rocking slowed. A tremor passed through her shoulders, and then broken. Raw, barely audible, she whispered a human sound. "Ma." The syllable shattered something inside Tayan. Not because he knew who she meant, he didn't, but because the pain behind the sound was unmistakable. It was the cry of a child remembering a life stolen from her. He didn't push her, didn't question her, didn't reach for her. He simply let her feel. Roa's breaths grew uneven. She wrapped her arms around her knees and pulled them tighter to her chest. Staring into the fire with eyes full of ghosts, her voice came again, softer, uncertain, the shape of a memory she couldn't fully grasp. "Ma." Then the word dissolved on her tongue, as if she had forgotten how to say more. Tayan lowered his head respectfully. The firelight danced on the walls, illuminating the truth he had only suspected. Roa had not always belonged to the wolves. Once, she had belonged to people. Once, she had belonged to someone. And for the first time since he'd entered the cave, Tayan understood that the wild girl beside him wasn't only a mystery. She was a wound, one he did not know how to heal, but one he would not abandon. The dawn broke slowly over the mesa, casting pale, silver light over the wet rocks and scattered sagebrush. Tayan had barely slept, watching Roa curl in the cave, still caught between the wild and the human world. The storm had passed, leaving the land washed and glistening, but that calm was deceptive. Danger often followed peace in the desert. A faint rustle outside the cave entrance made Tayan tense immediately. He nudged Ash Breath slightly, signaling the horse to remain quiet. Roa stiffened beside him, her wolf-like instincts firing at the subtle sound. Her head tilted, ears twitching, nose sniffing the wind. Tayan followed her gaze toward the rocky slope outside. Figures emerged from the mist. At first, they were just shadows, moving cautiously, but Tayan recognized the shape and equipment instantly. Trappers or hunters, rifles slung over their shoulders, boots crunching softly over wet stone. They were tracking the wolves, likely drawn by the pack's raids on traps or livestock. But their eyes scanned the cave mouth, and Tayan knew exactly what they would see next. Roa growled low in her throat, a warning that vibrated through the stone floor. Her stance was tense, shoulders coiled, body pressing subtly between Tayan and the cave entrance. The wolves outside might have accepted him, but these humans would not. Tayan raised a hand. "Easy," he whispered to her, careful not to provoke panic. The girl's eyes flicked to his, searching for guidance. He nodded toward the approaching hunters, keeping his voice low. "Stay back. Stay hidden." The hunters drew closer, voices rising in excitement. I saw tracks. Wolves this close to the mesa, there's a prize in there. One of them gestured toward the cave mouth. Maybe there's a pup or... His words faltered as he noticed the faint form of Roa in the shadows. Tayan stepped forward, keeping himself between the girl and the humans. Stop, he said firmly. His voice was low, steady, and unyielding, carrying the calm authority of someone who had survived more than these men could imagine. There is nothing here for you. The hunters laughed, misreading his calm for fear. One of them raised a rifle, pointing it toward the cave, expecting easy prey. Tayan's eyes flicked to Roa. She crouched lower, ready to spring, her teeth bared and eyes blazing like fire. Do not shoot, Tayan warned. His voice carried a strange authority that silenced even the most skeptical hunter. Step back. This cave is not yours. The alpha of the wolves, he had heard their calls last night, wasn't visible yet, but Tayan felt its presence in the way Roa moved, in the tension in the air. She sniffed, assessed, and then nudged her head toward him. The unspoken message was clear: protect her. Protect the pack. The hunters hesitated, uncertain now. There was something in Tayan's stance, in the quiet confidence of his body, that suggested he was no ordinary man. He did not fear them, and they instinctively recognized danger in approaching further. Roa crept closer to Tayan, pressing her side against his leg. He felt the tremor in her muscles, the warning and the plea, and held his ground. Slowly, he gestured with his hand toward the exit of the cave. A subtle command not to flee, but to show cooperation. We do not seek conflict. The hunters finally lowered their weapons, though uneasily. One muttered, maybe we'll find another way around. These wolves aren't worth it if there's trouble. The rest nodded, retreating slowly into the misty morning dot as the last of their shadows disappeared. Roa let out a soft, relieved chuff. Tayan reached down slowly, allowing her to see he would not harm her, that he had not abandoned her. She circled him once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then relaxed slightly, ears still flicking toward the cave mouth, for the first time. Tayan realized something profound. The girl was not only protected by the wild instincts she had learned from the wolves, but also by the connection she had forged with him. Together, they had navigated a delicate standoff between two very different worlds. The human hunters and the pack that had raised her. The storm was gone. The hunters had left. But the tension remained, a reminder that survival in the desert meant vigilance. And that trust, even fragile trust, was as powerful a shield as any weapon. Roa returned to her hollow, curling near the fire's faint warmth, glancing at Tayan as if to say, "You've earned your place for now," and Tayan knew the real test had only just begun. The morning sun pierced the mist over the mesa, casting long, pale shadows that stretched across the cave floor. The storm had finally passed, leaving the air crisp and sharp, filled with the scent of wet earth and pine. Tayan sat quietly near the fire, watching Roa as she crouched at the cave entrance. She had spent the night in uneasy vigilance, listening for the distant calls of her wolf pack. Her amber eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and alert. She caught a glimmer of movement in the brush and stiffened. Tayan followed her gaze, but he saw nothing threatening, only the distant sway of grass and the soft curve of the rocks. Roa's body language told him everything. Her heart was torn between two worlds. The wolf pack she had grown up with waited for her outside, their calls echoing faintly across the cleared sky. They had accepted Tayan yesterday, but they would never fully forgive the intrusion. She could rejoin them at any moment, vanish into the wilderness, and remain wild forever. Tayan moved slowly, speaking softly. "Roa," he said, his tone low and steady, carrying the weight of trust he had earned through days of cautious negotiation. "You don't have to choose tonight. You can stay. Or go." She turned sharply toward him, eyes wide, a mixture of fear and uncertainty in her expression. Tayan didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. His stillness, his patience, was the message she required. He would not force her. Her nostrils flared, sniffing the air, reading the scents of the mesa, the wolves, the humans, Tayan, ash breath. She crouched low again, her mind whirling like the wind that had swept through the mesa yesterday. Her pack was her family, her survival, her identity. Yet something about Tayan, the calm in his movements, the respect in his voice, the warmth in his presence stirred a strange, new curiosity. She took a hesitant step forward, then stopped. Her gaze flicked back toward the open wilderness. The alpha male had appeared at the edge of the clearing, his golden eyes fixed on her. The others shifted behind him, waiting for her decision. Her instinct screamed to run, to join them, to embrace the familiar, yet she did not move. Roa exhaled slowly, a low, almost human sigh, and then glanced at Tayan. Her eyes lingered on him, searching for something she could not name. Her hand lifted, brushing against the stone floor between them, a small, hesitant gesture of trust. She did not step fully forward, but neither did she retreat. The alpha wolf gave a soft chuff, a sound of questioning, almost disappointed. Roa rose slightly, her body tense but deliberate, then touched Tayan's arm lightly. Not forcefully, not demanding, but seeking assurance. Tayan mirrored her gesture with his own hand, palm open and steady. The wolves outside waited, patience waning. Roa turned her gaze to them, hesitated, and then returned her attention to Tayan. She took a small step forward, closer than she had ever dared. Her eyes softened. Her lips parted, letting out a sound that was part sigh, part murmur. A sound that bridged the wild and the human. Her choice was clear. She would not abandon the wolves entirely. They were her past, but she was choosing to remain with Tayan, at least for now. The pack understood. They waited no longer, slowly retreating into the wilderness with a mix of disappointment and respect. Roa lowered herself onto her haunches and leaned lightly against Tayan. For the first time, she allowed herself to rest near a human, to accept warmth and trust without fear. Tayan reached out cautiously and let his hand rest near hers, careful not to overwhelm her. In that moment, a fragile new bond was formed, one that balanced instinct and humanity, wildness and trust. Roa's choice was not just a decision to stay. It was a decision to explore a new path. Uncertain but promising, the sun climbed higher over the mesa, and for the first time in days, the cave felt like a home for both the wild girl and the Apache, who had earned her trust. The morning had settled into a calm brightness, the sky streaked with pale gold and soft pink, a gentle promise after the storm's fury. Tayan and Roa stepped out of the cave together, their shadows stretching long across the glistening rock. The air smelled of wet earth, sage, and pine, each breath a reminder of the wild world Roa had once called home. For a moment, neither spoke. Tayan let ash breath move at its own pace, sensing the horse's unease around the girl who had spent years moving like a shadow among wolves. Roa, in turn, stayed close to him but kept her posture light and alert, ready for any instinctive call of her pack. Yet something had shifted between them. She had chosen, at least for now, to step into a world that had once been alien, unpredictable, and full of danger. She had chosen trust. And Tayan knew that trust was as fragile and valuable as water in the desert. As they descended the rocky slope from the cave, Roa glanced back at the distant forest where the alpha and the pack had disappeared. A flicker of longing passed over her face. She had survived among them for years, learned their language, and become part of their rhythms. Leaving meant entering the unknown again. But she did not look at Tayan with fear. She looked at him with something else, curiosity perhaps, or a tentative hope that he could guide her through this strange human world. Tayan, sensing her hesitation, spoke softly. "You don't have to leave them forever," he said. "You can return if you choose. But if you stay, I will help you learn what you've missed. You won't have to face it alone." Roa paused, her amber eyes meeting his. The language of trust they had developed in the cave, the gestures, the shared understanding, the calm presence, was enough. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. No words passed her lips, yet Tayan understood perfectly. She would follow him. At least for now. They reached a flat stretch of land, where the wind carried fewer whispers of the storm and more of the open desert beyond. Tayan adjusted the straps on Ash Breath and handed Roa a small bundle of dried meat and cloth. She hesitated, then took it with careful fingers, as if accepting not only sustenance but a gesture of humanity. The first steps out of the cave were tentative. Roa's bare feet touched the wet stones, then the dirt, and then the grass. Each sensation was new, each texture foreign yet grounding. Tayan walked beside her, silent and patient, letting her take the lead when she wished and guiding when necessary. As they moved further from the cave, Roa's breathing eased, her tense muscles relaxing with every step. Occasionally, she glanced back, not out of fear but acknowledgement. Her past still existed, but she was choosing a new story now. By midday, they reached a small clearing where the sunlight pooled like warm water over the earth. Tayan knelt and drew a shallow circle in the dirt. "Here," he said softly. "This is a start. You decide the rest." Roa crouched beside him, mimicking the gesture. With careful fingers, she traced shapes in the soil, tentative but deliberate, exploring the human ways of marking and claiming space. Tayan smiled quietly. It was small, but it was progress, a bridge between her world of instincts and the one she had yet to discover. For the first time in years, Roa allowed herself to feel safe without retreating into shadows. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of danger, wildness, and opportunity. Yet in that expanse she did not feel alone. Tayan rose, extending his hand to her. She took it after a heartbeat of hesitation. Together they stepped forward, leaving the cave and the storm behind. The path ahead was uncertain. The wilderness still whispered its challenges. But for the first time, they would face it together. A human and a girl raised by wolves, bound by trust, courage, and the fragile beginnings of a shared life.